On July 9th, 1961, thousands of Russian citizens gathered at the Tushino airfield on the outskirts of Moscow to celebrate Aviation Day, an official Soviet military holiday celebrating the Russian Aerospace Forces. Along with top Soviet military officials, a few Western representatives stood in attendance after accepting an invitation from Russia to observe their newest aircraft developments. As the show proceeded, 10 models of a new, strangely shaped aircraft flew above them. The Westerners could not believe it. With performance similar to America's Convair B-58 Hustler, this was Russia's first bomber capable of supersonic flight. Soon, the startled NATO members relayed their information to their headquarters and even nicknamed the mysterious tube-shaped supersonic bomber. Its first nickname, Bullshot, was too inappropriate. The second one, Beauty, was too complimentary, especially for the Soviet Union. Finally, the third one, Blinder, stuck for years to come, even more than the aircraft itself. Comrade Tupolev. Andrei Tupolev was a top-tier pioneer in Soviet aeronautics and one of the most influential of his time. Over his 5-decade-long career, the founder and director of the Tupolev Design Bureau personally oversaw the development of more than 100 civilian and military aircraft, including some of the Soviet Union's most recognizable aircraft, like the Tu-22, Tu-95, and the reverse-engineered Tu-4. Tupolev was respected and well-liked by top Soviet commanders and his employees alike. He was also known to be self-assured, ambitious, and a tough but passionate leader with a knack for discovering new talents within his bureau. In the 1950s, with the Cold War in full throttle, 2 Soviet aircraft companies dominated bomber design: Myasishchev Experimental Design Bureau and Tupolev Design Bureau. Both companies were in the development stages of 2 more bombers, Tupolev's OKB-156 model and Vladimir Mikhailovich Myasishchev's OKB-23. The latter team had even been staffed with engineers who had previously worked with Tupolev. When neither aircraft proved capable of a long enough range to attack the United States, the Soviet government announced a new contest to replace these designs. During the preliminary design submissions, Tupolev considered 3 different versions of his proposals. In the end, he submitted the second model, the long-range supersonic bomber 105. 105. Despite objections from numerous members of the Communist Party, the project was approved by the Soviet government in August of 1954. The aircraft, a supersonic medium-range bomber, was a swept-wing aircraft heavily based on the Tu-16. The fuselage was tube-shaped with a pointed nose and stepped cockpit that placed the pilot forward and slightly to the left to increase visual quality. The weapons officer would be seated behind the pilot, while the navigator was positioned below and within the fuselage. The 105 was fitted with novelty downwards-firing ejector seats. This direction meant that the minimum altitude for safe ejection was 1,150 feet, preventing its use during takeoff and landing when most aircraft accidents occur. The crew entered the aircraft by lowering the seats on rails, climbing through external stepladders, taking their place, and then cranking upward into the cockpit. The first prototype of the 105 design, with BD-7M engines, made its maiden flight on June 21, 1958, flown by test pilot Yuri Alashev. Immediately after its first flights, the Tupolev Bureau quickly noticed that the design had neither the speed nor the range expected by the Soviet Union. Thus, the model underwent a series of extensive modifications and upgrades. The result of all the changes was the 105A aircraft. Even before its first flight, the aircraft was equipped with more powerful engines and an additional prototype with different motors to figure out which one performed best. The model first flew on September 7, 1959. The aircraft encountered several problems during testing, and several crewmen and pilots were lost in landing and takeoff crashes. Still, the aerial production of the aircraft, now coded Tu-22, began in 1959 at Factory No. 22 in Kazan. The first Tu-22 bomber was introduced to the world at the Tushino Aviation Day Parade on July 9, 1961, with several Western and NATO allied country representatives in attendance. They would all be witnesses to Russia's first supersonic bomber. Supersonic booze carrier. Despite entering service in 1962, the Tu-22 experienced many problems, resulting in unserviceability, crashes, and several significant updates between each production model. Other issues included a panel that blocked the runway's view during landing, a tendency for aerodynamic heating, and slow landing speed. Even after some of the problems were resolved as each model rolled out of the factory, the blinder was complex, and not everyone could fly it. To fly the first operational blinders, the pilots were hand-selected from the best ranks of Tu-16 pilots, but they were used to relegate the complicated avionics panel and most flight operations to their co-pilots. However, there was no co-pilot aboard the blinder's crew to navigate the unique cockpit layout filled with different levers and handles, and most of the accidents likely occurred due to a confused pilot trying to work out the systems. Surprisingly, one of the crew's biggest impediments aboard the Tu-22 came in the form of alcohol. Oxygen was provided via a bleed air system on the engine's compressors, but as the aircraft took to the sky, the air became hot and needed to cool down before being pumped into the cockpit. To achieve this, the designers installed a sizable total loss evaporator, which ran on a mixture of 60% distilled water and 40% vodka. This strange system earned the aircraft the nickname Supersonic Booze Carrier. This solution eventually brought a new set of problems in the form of alcoholism. The clandestine consumption of this cooling substance caused several pilots to lose their temper both at work and in their personal lives. Drinking cooling fluid aboard the blinder was eventually forbidden, or at least severely restricted from the crew. Save face. From the beginning, it was evident that the blinder Tu-22 was inferior to its predecessor, the Tu-16. By the mid-1960s, Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev became more interested in the development of ballistic missiles, and thus the production of underwhelming bombers like the Tu-22 was in danger of being cancelled. To try to please the top Soviet air commanders, the Tupolev Bureau created several variants of the Tu-22, each with different features to complete alternative missions. A trainer version of the blinder had a raised second cockpit for an instructor pilot in order to minimize incidents. With only 46 of them in production, the results were disappointing. However, to try to salvage at least some of the aircraft's offensive combat role capabilities, the Tu-22K was designed as a missile carrier with the ability to carry one Kh-22 standoff weapon. The last variant of the Tu-22 subtype was the Tu-22P, an electronic warfare modified version used for electronic intelligence gathering. Some of these models were also adjusted to serve as standoff ECM jammers supporting the Tu-22K missile carriers, with one squadron allocated to each regiment. Operational history. The only Soviet combat use of the blinder came 26 years after its operational introduction, as several variants participated in the Soviet withdrawal from Afghanistan. As the Soviets retreated to Soviet territory, several Tu-22P variant models protected the return route. Additionally, radar-jamming Tu-22PD aircraft covered their sibling variant Tu-22M3 backfire C bombers, operating from an airfield in the Turkmen Soviet Socialist Republic on missions near the Pakistani border. These same models also protected the strike aircraft against Pakistani F-16 Fighting Falcon air defense activity. And in addition to their primary electronic warfare mission, Tu-22PD crews were tasked with photo reconnaissance missions to assess bomb damage in the war zone. However, the Soviet Union was not the only nation to use the aircraft. After acquiring many blinders of their own, the Libyan Arab Republic Air Force used the aircraft in actual combat against Tanzania as part of the Ugandan-Tanzania War in the late 1970s. During the conflict, a single Tu-22 flew a bombing mission against the city of Mwanza, but the sortie was unsuccessful. The aircraft was also used during the Chadian-Libyan conflict in the 1980s, as it participated in strikes against Chad and Sudan. The last recorded flight of a Libyan-owned blinder happened on September 7, 1992, and the aircraft was soon retired, most likely due to a lack of spare parts for repairs. From 1980 to 1988, Iraq also used its Tu-22s during the Iran-Iraq War to perform offensive operations. The country also used their blinders, along with other Soviet aircraft such as Tu-16s, Su-22s, and MiG-25s, in flying raids against the cities of Tehran, Isfahan, and Shiraz. Finally, the Iraqi Tu-22s were deployed to service during the last operations of the Tanker War, a series of engagements against merchant vessels in the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz between 1984 and 1988, in which the Iraqi Air Force lost 7 of the models and damaged even more. The remaining Iraqi blinders were destroyed by American aircraft during the Gulf War in 1991. Legacy. The Tu-22 was meant to replace the Tu-16, but its poor performance offered no actual capability increase. Immediately after its introduction in 1962, it became clear that the aircraft was inadequate for service. In addition to maintenance problems, the Tu-22's handling characteristics were dangerous, and even the best pilots in the Soviet Union were terrified of flying it. That same year, the Tupolev Bureau began developing a significant update for the aircraft. The result was the Tu-22M, a supersonic variable sweep-wing, long-range strategic and maritime strike bomber. As of 2017, the Tu-22M was still in use with the Russian Air Force, and the legacy of the Tu-22 blinder lives on. Thank you for watching our Dark Skies video. Remember that we have 7 more channels with hundreds of videos for you to enjoy. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon to be notified of our newest content.